Well, welcome everyone. Here we are at the Seminary of the Third Age, our final session for 2021. And I think we've saved the best for last. Our theme this year has been searching for authenticity. You can see it there on the slide. And each month, each of the 4 months, March, May, August and October this year, we've had a variation of that theme. In March it was searching for authentic worship. In May it was searching for an authentic Jesus for now. In August it was searching for an authentic spirituality of creation. And this month it has been searching for an authentic Christian witness. We've had an amazing array of speakers over the year, and tonight we're going to hear from 4 of them in a panel show forum format, addressing the topic, how to face the big questions of 2021. But before I introduce tonight's speakers and explain the format of our forum, let's first do our Acknowledgement of Country. We acknowledge the Kaurna people, the sovereign first peoples of this place. We honour their elders, past, present and emerging, together with all descendants of this nation, for their care for these lands and waters since creation. Amen. And now for our speakers. There they are on the slide, and there they are sitting in front of you. So firstly we have Shawn Gilbert, who was here on March the 4th, speaking about when awe and wonder happens in worship, starting from your left. And then we have Norm Harville. On August the 26th, Norm Harville, as well as launching his latest book, The Trinity Wisdom, Norm spoke on why not retrieve the wisdom, creation, spirituality. Then we have Vicky Balabansky on May the 27th. She spoke on how the cosmic Christ speaks to our times. And finally we have Mario Trinidad. On May the 20th, Mario spoke on how liberation theology grounds the Christ event. Now, I bet you all remember all those sessions very well. So, in a moment, let me explain the format of our evening. We'll leave this slide up here for a while during the evening so you can check where we're up to. So this is how we're going to do things. Firstly, our 4 speakers are each going to speak for approximately exactly 7 minutes each. Not sure that we're going to quite ring a bell after 6 minutes or something, but they're going to speak for 7 minutes, and they're going to develop or reflect on their earlier presentation, but also bring it into the main topic for tonight of how to face the big questions of 2021. So that's the first part of the evening, our speakers, for 7 minutes each. Then, and you're already more or less sitting in groups, that's the way we've set the room up. So in your groups, for 15 minutes, there's 2 things to work on. We'll leave this on the screen so you can see it. Firstly, what is the key to authenticity, which is our general theme for Seminary of Third Age for the year. From tonight's presenters and other presenters during the year as well. That's the first thing to think about and discuss. And the second thing, and we'd love each group to come up with at least 1 question to give to the panel. So that'll take about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a question time, the forum time itself, for about 30 minutes, when we'll give you each the opportunity. We'll bring around the microphone, and folks on the tables, you can have the opportunity to ask the question or questions that you've prepared. And after that, we'll finish off and have a great supper time. So that's our format for the evening. So without further ado, I'm now going to invite our first speaker. It is Shawn Gilbert. Please welcome Shawn to the meeting.
good to be back again. I was actually here on Sunday, so...
Did anybody else come?
They did. They did. It was a lovely return. I'm very aware of the time, and hopefully I won't go over the 7 minutes. And given the time frame, I wanted to tell a story rather than to dive headlong into some sort of analysis. And Alison Wish will know something of this story because she was involved in the group that this story takes place in. For those who have a membership or aligned to the Uniting Church, you might know that of recent times that what's called mission resourcing within the Synod has been running expos, not only in Adelaide but regionally. And there was an expo up at Murray Bridge last Saturday, and I was invited to be a workshop leader. The topic they gave me was something like the use of the Bible, or reading the Bible, or something or other. And as I said to the group by way of introduction, I'm somewhat of a talking head. I do a lot of talking about God and about Christianity and so forth. I'd actually like to talk to God in the midst of this workshop. So I had actually entitled the workshop Praying the Psalms in Disruptive Times. And I wanted to introduce that briefly with a few dot points and then actually use a selection of psalms in different media forms, if you like. So some said, some sung, some listened to. And I stressed it's one of these moments where you think you've been clear and then you realise that you haven't necessarily been heard. And the dot point I read out, and Alison I'm sure will remember, I said, so rather than talk about the Psalms or God, or even analyse them, we're going to pray, recite, sing and listen to a range of them. The key part of this workshop then being a noticing of movement. What stirs your heart? What challenges the mind? And what might be a further invitation into the depths of the Christian life? So, by use of using, if you're familiar with the Psalms, this thing of salah, this sense of pause, you find often in the midst of Psalms. So between Psalms, I invited anyone to make a response in terms of a word or a short phrase that resonated with you, which you think might be worth sharing with the whole group. And we started with Psalm 1. I had my eyes closed because at this point I was in a if you like, a place of worship, a place of prayer. And I was looking forward to some resonances. And I actually began, as you do, leading some of these things by saying, like a tree planted by the water with its roots deep. You know, I was trying to pick up on the resonance of the psalm and bring it into a sense of life. Well, next thing I know, because I had my eyes closed and I couldn't actually tell voices because of masks and so forth, someone began wanting to sort of offer a commentary on the psalm, and then someone began with a deeper analysis of the psalm, and then someone disagreed with that analysis. Is this a fairly accurate reading of things, Alison? And so it almost became... Yes.
They couldn't do it.
It almost became contested space. And I found myself saying afterwards, gently as much as I can, this is not about analysis. And this is about listening for that which resonates. Now, the reason I mention that is because when I came earlier in the year, my topic was to do with awe and wonder happening in worship. And I would have made the point then, I hope, that that's largely contingent or dependent upon a radical sense of receptivity and openness, not coming with our agenda, with our sense of preference. The problem, of course, and I would have mentioned this in March, is that our Western culture, by and large, is highly analytical, and a secularised culture loves contested space. We see it in Parliament. I'm sure you're aware of this, you know, that Paul Keating described federal Parliament as a clearinghouse of the Australian, psyche. But my question back to you is this what Christian worship's about? Is it about a contested space, or is it a deeply listening space? Well, you can probably gather what I think. Because I think it does require a radical sense of divestment. It was 20 years ago, if you can recall that Jack Spong actually visited these shores, not for the first time, but certainly with us, spoke from this lectern he did. And he made the point that, coming to church isn't about leaving your brain at the door. Do you remember him saying that? That was a sort of a byline of his. And certainly it's not. But it may be withholding a certain amount of things that the brain is thinking through in order to receive something new. I think that is my point. And with that in mind, and probably my time is just about up, quote, if I can find it on my phone, which I should be able to, if I can flick the thing. Dear. When you need these things, I'll have to paraphrase it. From T.S. Eliot, The Little Guinea. There's this beautiful image, and I can probably paraphrase it and probably tell the story behind it. The poem Little Guinea, if you're familiar with this, it's the last poem he ever wrote. And Little Guinea was a little chapel in rural England. Some of you may have been there, I'm not sure. And he makes this point, and Little Guinea becomes a metaphor for worship and an approach to worship. And he says, if you've come this way by any means or by any direction, it's always the same. You're basically saying, I wish I had it with you. But basically saying you're not here to carry reports or to inform curiosity or to express opinion. That's not what he said, but it's something like that. But you are here to kneel, where prayer has always been valid. So in many ways, authenticity has as much to do with divestment as it has to do with accumulation. In fact, I think it's built more on divestment and humility than it is about informing curiosity and accumulating more knowledge. I hope my word was gracious on Saturday, Alison. I didn't feel that gracious at some point, but it was, please withhold the analysis so that the still small voice of God can still speak. Authenticity, and I'll probably leave it at there. On our kitchen wall, we have this beautiful picture and a verse from the poet Wendell Berry. He makes the point that his sense of authenticity came when he gave up what he was not. Beautiful line. And it's at that point of humility and radical openness and receptivity things begin to stir, and I think things begin to happen in worship. I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Shawn. Next we have the inimitable Norm Harwell.
On your table, ladies and gentlemen, there should be a sheet which says Wisdom, Authenticity. And my purpose is to continue off from the very last words that were said at our last session. That session gave us a definition of authenticity, which I have recorded at the top of the page. Authenticity is to bring the fullness of our unique God-inspired self to life. Now, I don't know what your response was to that, but it was quite extraordinary. And I thought, what I'll do now is work with you to take that definition and go piece by piece through the definition and see where you would want to change it. Now, already our previous speaker has changed it. Authenticity. Now, at the beginning, I've got the quote from that definition. And I'll end up with my own definition at the end. But you can have your definition. As you go along, there's a space for you to scribble in what you would like to add or to change as you go along. Authenticity, starting off, A, to bring the fullness, or would you like to say, or be true to the core, or the heart, or even sustain our true inner self, or how would you start? B, of our unique, well, yes, That word was especially valuable. We're talking about the unique dimension of you, the unique dimension of the authentic that we want to find. Unique is indeed extremely valuable. So I would say yes to that right from the outset. Then comes C. God inspired. Well, is that what you would have used? Or, as I would have suggested, given our connection, wisdom inspired. Now, if you go through the wisdom thinking of our books in Job or Proverbs, God too. God is inspired by wisdom. That's extraordinary. God needs the wisdom to be able to create the world. God's inspired by the wisdom and he searches for wisdom. God is inspired by wisdom. Or would you say, gospel inspired? That's what stirs you. What would you add? What would you say? Wisdom inspired? God inspired? Gospel inspired? Self-inspired? Put down what you think at that point. Then self. Self. Do you mean your inner self? Your psychological ego? Or in Lutheran terms, it would be our faith. Yes, that's what's important. That's primary, not yourself, but your faith. That's what comes first. Or can you even say, as we would in the wisdom school, your incarnate wisdom, the wisdom that's incarnate within you. That's extraordinary. That's what we talked about last time. To life, the last point. Or to discern the truth to life, I would say, or to discern the truth in our scientific world. After all, we are in the science world now. We're not just back in the ancient world. And after all, the wisdom school the wise were the scientists of the ancient world. They didn't just accept a revelation from God. They didn't go to the church and just listen. They went to the church. When they heard a psalm, they analysed it. Or to be faithful to the truth of the gospel. How would you end your definition of authenticity? Now, if we were following the wisdom school, this is my definition at the end. And it would be one you could totally disagree with, but in the wisdom thinking, as distinct from the prophets or the priests, this is the wisdom perspective. Authenticity is to sustain the capacity of our unique, wisdom-inspired inner self, to discern the truth in all the domains of the world around you, whether it's science or nature or God. You use your capacity to discern all the truths, even the truths about God. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Ever the teacher. And here's Vicky Balabansky.
I didn't hear Christie's talk at your last meeting, but the question of authenticity is key to her PhD and to her work, and I'm sure it was a fascinating thing. I was wondering for tonight, what makes a religion authentic? What makes a religion authentic? And of course, when you look at what a definition of religion is, it's a collection of, beliefs and practices and symbols and narratives, and much of that is explaining the world as it is and our place in the world. Is a religion that does that necessarily authentic? I want to suggest tonight that in some sense an authentic religion needs to be one that enables a unitive vision, one that invites us to move beyond our individual self, to connect with each other and with creation is, I think, a strong aspect of what people are looking for when they're looking for a religion and a religious experience. My talk some months ago now was on the cosmic Christ, the one in whom and through whom all things are created, sustained and reconciled. So what I was doing at that time was tracing the way in which the traditions, the biblical traditions, right back to one of the earliest letters of the Bible, 1 Corinthians, dated around about 54 CE, already was affirming this affirmation that we find in chapter 8. Indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. Then he says, it is not everyone, however, who has this knowledge. So on one level, Paul is affirming that this is a piece of knowledge, but it's also an experience. It actually, I think, reflects the worshipping life, the liturgical life of the early church, that in a sense they had to move beyond simply a narrow affirmation of a monotheistic faith to affirm that in Christ somehow they were experiencing all things. When we think about the little hymns that are embedded in various parts of the New Testament, such as in the Philippians hymn in chapter 2 of Philippians, though he was in the form of God, he did not account equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself. And you know the rest of the hymn. Or in Colossians chapter 1, the Colossians hymn, which talks about Christ as the image of the invisible God. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. Again, this is a connection with Christ that isn't undermining the historical particularity of Jesus of Nazareth, but it's saying that in fact, through his death and resurrection, we connect with him in a different way. In fact, by connecting with the cosmos, we are connecting with Christ himself. We find it in many other places. I can't resist, of course, Colossians, but where it says about the Christian community, here there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. And then, again, it's a unitive kind of vision whereby we see diversity with all these different ethnic groups and different cultures and practices, and yet when we see through the eyes of Christ, we see Christ in all. So I think for me that's talking about authentic religion, that we can move beyond our individual interests towards a common interest. And we can move even beyond our common interest with other human beings to a common interest with creation. And at this moment in history, that is one of the most pressing and difficult challenges that we have before us. How can we avert this seemingly even inevitable march towards global heating of 2.7 degrees, which is the trajectory we're on, and with all the devastating consequences that that has. In order to avert that, we need to have a more unitive vision of the way in which those creatures, those blades of grass, those waves of the sea, all things are in a sense Christ, and therefore are kin with me. The mystics, of course, saw this vision, and they talked about often a threefold part to this. They talked about a purgative aspect, that is to say, sort of self-emptying, an illuminative element, and then finally a unitive element. And so, obviously, we can't simply move from our individual self easily to grasp the unity vision, but that is the goal. And to conclude, you might know, perhaps even better than I, that Karl Rahner spoke of an everyday mysticism not confined to the saints. He said, in the days ahead, you will either be a mystic, one who has experienced God, or nothing at all. So God, give us the capacity to all be everyday mystics.
Thank you, Vicky. And now for Mario.
Thank you, Fergus. And thank you for inviting me again. For a Christian, I think the search for authenticity is inextricably linked with the following of Christ: discipleship. In Jesus, the incarnate Word, we get a clear glimpse of what it means to be fully human, to be authentic. To be a Christian is to walk, moved by the Spirit in the footsteps of Jesus. In Matthew's parable of the Last Judgment, we are told that whatever we do to the least of our brothers and sisters, we are doing to God. Tells us what it means to be like God. Matthew's text is without doubt central to Christian spirituality and provides us with a fundamental principle for discerning and finding the road of fidelity to Jesus. In one of his homilies, Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, now Saint Oscar Romero, he observed, quote, "There is a criterion for knowing whether God is close to us or far away. All those who worry about the hungry, the naked, the poor, the disappeared, the tortured, the imprisoned, about any suffering human being, are close to God," unquote. The gesture made towards the other determines our proximity to our distance from God. It is a love, in the words of Gustavo Gutierrez, recognized as the father of liberation theology, whose book, A Theology for Liberation, is 50 years this year since publication. He says it's a love that leaves its own porch. He writes, quote, "Love of neighbor is an essential component of Christian life. But as long as I apply the term only to the people who cross my path and come asking to me for help, my world will pretty much remain the same." Individual almsgiving and social reformism is a type of love, he says, that never leaves the porch. If you love those that love you, what merit is there? On the other hand, my world will change greatly if I go out to meet other people on their path and consider them as my neighbor, as the Good Samaritan did. Love of neighbor and love of God have become one and indivisible in the option for the poor. Jon Sobrino, who wrote his Christology at the Crossroads in the 1980s, he's a Spanish Jesuit who has lived most of his life in El Salvador and who survived the massacre of the Jesuit community at the University of Central America simply because he wasn't there at the time. He was in Bangkok. 6 Jesuits and their helper and her daughter were massacred by the army. Anyway, he says, the only way to get to know Jesus is to follow him in one's own life. That sounds very trivial but true. To try to identify oneself with his own concerns and to try to fashion his kingdom, his realm, in our midst. In other words, only through Christian praxis is it possible for us to draw close to Jesus. Following Jesus is a precondition for knowing Jesus. Discipleship is not an imitation or reproduction of certain historical traits of Jesus. Not only is this almost impossible, it contravenes the very historicity of Jesus. Rather, discipleship means reproducing in one's own life the fundamental thrust of Jesus' own efforts to be obedient to the Father in what was then a divided society. To extract Jesus from the vicissitudes of history, which is what in effect we try to do when we hastily abstract Jesus, make an abstract Jesus, or hastily universalize Jesus, or absolutize Jesus. It is to emasculate him and to make him insignificant. Only through history can the universal significance of Jesus Christ be verified and therefore be meaningful. This is an important aspect, I think, for discipleship. The God we believed in, the God we seek to follow and pattern our lives after, revealed to us in Jesus the way and how in history we need to live or have to live. We know that the realm of God is the key concept for understanding the truth of the life of Jesus, his words and actions. In pursuing the realm of God, God is discovered also as Abba, Father. Through his words and deeds, Jesus has revealed that the kingdom of God is the kingdom of the poor. So what does this mean for our search for authenticity? 2 points I want to make. Authenticity, like happiness, is something we do not directly seek. For a Christian, it is, important as it is, authenticity is a byproduct of fidelity to Jesus, the Christ. Secondly, authenticity is not a self-referential quest, a favorite word of Pope Francis. He says the church should not be self-referential, but should go to the existential peripheries. So, authenticity is not a self-referential quest. It is not the individualistic approach for fulfillment. Rather, authenticity arises out of a difficult paradox of those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake. That is, for the poor, the vulnerable, and disadvantaged, will find it. In conclusion, liberation theologians like to recite the phrase of St. Irenaeus, Gloria Dei, homo vivens, the glory of God to the human being alive. With a slight twist, they say, Gloria Dei, opus vivens, the glory of God is the poor alive. Or they put also another twist to the heretical statement, outside the church there is no salvation. That's a heresy. But then they say, outside or away from the poor, there is no salvation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mario. the dramatic meteorological event that's occurring right at the moment seemed to match well the drama of your little address there, which I think was very profound. So now, speakers, you've come in under time collectively, so well done for that. So now it's time, as you can see on the screen, for our sharing in groups, the forum part of our evening. So sit where you are or rearrange into groups of 4 if you like. You can see on the screen the 2 things to discuss. You have 15 minutes to do so approximately. Firstly, what is the key to authenticity from our speakers present and other presenters during the year? And what is a question or questions from the group for our panel to consider? There you go. So 15 minutes. Enjoy yourselves. Well, folks, I can hear you just at the last minute there hugging over whose question is going to get asked. But don't worry, you can ask more than one question, I think. So now it is our forum, our question time. So when you're ready, I think perhaps put up your hand and we'll bring the microphone around to you to speak. Here's our first.
Okay, thanks. Our question was, in the face of evil, what does authentic discipleship demand of us?
Is that for a particular one of the speakers? What we're going to do is, please, you might have to hear from all 4. Shawn's first.
Without being glib, courage, obviously. Because I honestly believe discipleship takes us to places of possibility, of renewed possibility. And some of those spaces are really conflicted, complex and difficult. So to enter into them at all takes a certain amount of courage. But to my mind, a silent response is just complicity. It's not actually contributing. And to speak, modestly may be virtuous, but at least to speak, or at least to act. The Gospels, I think, for me, continually show us Jesus was always in those places, and displaying enormous amounts of courage. This week, I'm just in the middle of an intensive, and I'm doing three morning reflections on John 8, to do with the woman who's caught in adultery. And you know the story that they're after his head, his blood, and yet also hers. She's almost secondary in the story. And so he's in a very dangerous place, a very conflicted space. And yet the courage that he shows for the sake of her well-being is quite remarkable. And I think the invitation to the followers is to be in this place with me, and to find courage through him, actually. So it is a difficult place, but it's the place I believe where Christians are called to. So.
Authenticity means facing the evil, means first recognizing what evil has done. The poor, the oppressed, you start there. That's what the gospel has said. You start there with the oppressed, with the poor, and then in that way highlight what evil is that is around. Your authenticity starts with the people who've been oppressed, not the other end.
I'd be interested to hear what you think, but very briefly, Shawn mentioned silence is not an option. I'm struck though that in the Passion narrative, particularly in Mark's Gospel I'm thinking about, Jesus does choose silence at certain times, and I think in the Greek the word is not a passive just sitting back, but it is in fact a decision to withhold certain things. And so on the one hand we see Jesus, when he's asked, "Are you the Christ?" he says, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of glory." So he speaks out and confesses in a very, so at that moment his authenticity is very tangible, but he also then is, shortly afterwards, chooses to be silent. And so I think in the face of evil, we need to reflect on our actions, not being complicit with the evil, taking a stand, yes, speaking, naming it at times, or at times simply withholding our agreement. But ultimately, I think this has been the challenge for Christians, to actually be authentic in the face of evil, and I fear that we have very often failed at this point. We have looked like everybody else. So to find the courage, as you mentioned, to in the community of believers to be different, to take that countercultural path, that's the challenge.
Thank you. Very quickly, liberation theologians talk of the same process, two sides of the same coin, the denunciation and annunciation. So we are called to denounce evil, analyze evil, without personalizing it. Poverty is evil, but poor people are not evil. Right? So denouncing it and analyzing it, but also I think as Christians we're called to announce what the alternative is, the realm of God, so that we are not just, as it were, throwing stones, but actually building up also. And perhaps depending on the situation, our building up is already a denunciation. We don't have to denounce directly, but our proclaiming another alternative society where there's equality, where there's solidarity, is already a way of denouncing it.
Just another addition. Charles Strong, who was the founder of the Australian Church, was way back when, was a sheer pacifist. And for him, pacifism was the opposition. War is necessarily evil, so you need to oppose it. And at Armistice Day, he had this famous speech: "Why should Christian men of one country kill Christian men of another country? That's evil."
Thank you, panel. Now the next question.
Our questions preceded by a bit of explanation, and we didn't do a Western analysis of everything, but we did talk about what each of the four speakers presented and how we came to a unitive view about it. Shawn talked about contemplative worship and listening, and Vicky talked about being an everyday mystic or you're nothing, and Norm talked about wisdom-inspired inner self, and I'll get to Mario in a minute. So our question is, how come in our great religious tradition there is no contemplative tradition? And how can it be stimulated? You know, we even thought if there's a generative presbytery, there could be a contemplative presbytery. But In terms of Mario, he was talking about not just talking about it, but acting, and we thought it would be a great idea if Progressive Christianity had on its webpage lists of contemplative services or activities that people could join in. So, our question is, what would you do about establishing a contemplative tradition in, basically, we're mostly uniting church, or even involve ourselves in other churches' contemplative activities?
Was that addressed to a particular person, Desmond, or just to the panel? Addressed to the panel generally?
Oh yes, each of them, they all had an activity.
We'll go first again, Shawn.
I'll hand it on quickly, I think. I kind of don't see a divided world there. The contemplative tradition has always been a part of the Christian church. Certainly the monastic movement, I think, has continually reminded the Christian church about the need and the place for contemplation, out of which social engagement comes. I think the misnomer has been that the contemplative experience is disengaged from the world, that it doesn't care, that it's somehow just cloistered and it's enjoying itself, self-referential, as someone mentioned in the presentation. That's not the case. The contemplative stance is a facing, it's not a hiding, it's an openness, a radical openness. Vicky mentioned the mystics. There's plenty of role models, and I think expressions of community, I think that we can draw inspiration from. And the other thing about the contemplative stance, it's based on exploration, as far as I understand. It wants to pursue the questions. It's not settling for easy, trite answers, and it will live in uncertainty. That's the other beauty of the contemplative tradition, I think. You can live with paradox, you can sit there with it, and not fret too much about it, because you know that it will at some point unfold further into guidance and certain direction. So, I think for me it's alive. It's a matter of living it. Actually, it's probably more to the point, and promoting it that way. I think I'm losing my words.
For me, the contemplative thing that happened to me in recent years has been sitting down with the Aboriginal, the First Nations people, and learning and listening to creation, reading the landscape, discerning what's there coming to me, to contemplate not just the sky, but the trees, to contemplate everything. And from Vicky's point of view, I might be contemplating Christ. But with the Aboriginal people, I'm contemplating the spirit, the rainbow spirit, the creator spirit, the life spirit that's in everything. It connects up with their ancestors and connects up with my faith. Contemplating is to read, to listen to wonder about the landscape. That's one way.
I was speaking with Auntie Denise on the phone this morning. Auntie Denise, of course, spoke to this group about Indigenous spirituality. And she is one of the things that energises her is to think that Indigenous spirituality is important not just for Indigenous people, but for second peoples. And one of the things that she emphasises is that we all have Indigenous spiritual roots, and she wants to encourage us to look back into the Celtic and the Cornish and the ancient spiritual traditions from which our own cultural roots draw energy, and see how that can connect with Indigenous spirituality. So she's talking about wanting to run a retreat that brings together Aboriginal spirituality and Cornish or Celtic spirituality next year. So, that'll be an exciting and productive, I think, recognition that it's not just they have Indigenous spiritual heritage, we do as well. I do think the idea of talking about ourselves, not so much as progressive Christians versus evangelical Christians, but as contemplative Christians, I think that has some merit, because we are progressive in the sense that we are open to the new that God is doing, but we're also open to what God has done in the past. We want this big picture of that it embraces not only a variety of Christian traditions, but looks beyond to recognise God at work in all sorts of places. So I think contemplative is actually quite a strong idea. And one of the books that I read last year that really warmed my heart is a book by Elaine Heath, which talks about the mystic way of evangelism. And so that kind of messes with your mind, because you think of evangelism over there and mysticism over there. But no, she actually shows how contemplative, mystical Christianity is invitational. It brings good news. It helps people glimpse God in their lives. So, yeah, moving away from the polarities and towards something more unified is worthwhile.
Thanks. Yes, Western philosophy has programmed us to polarize and to binary thinking. And I think the challenge for us is to see contemplation and prayer as the most radical thing we can do. Right? In terms of, in the face of evil, that prayer can be a very radical thing. And so contemplation and action are two sides of the same coin. It's contemplation is action, and action is contemplation. And that's a challenge, because we tend to divide.
Thank you. And next question.
Thank you. You asked us first what the key to authenticity was, and we pretty much settled on Norm's part C, where all of us recognised that there was an absence. That is God inspired. So we felt that there needs to be some inspiration. Now our question was, where does that inspiration come from? Or when does that inspiration come from? And Norm sort of said last week, we had, I don't know if the gentleman was here, we had a Jungian psychologist. Is he behind me? No. And Norm took him to task, but asked him about Jungian philosophy, where there's both good and evil in a person. And we'd sort of like to work on that a bit. And we're wondering, if that fulfillment actually comes when you leave the church. I know the speaker last week spoke that people come to church for that fulfillment, but it may actually be the exit from the church when that fulfillment comes, when you go out into the world, which is what Mario spoke about, leaving the porch. But we'd like the question to be directed to start with Vicky, because she spoke about her mystic evangelism and how that was both sides of things. And also it's not the Church of Christ, so we can start with the ladies.
So just reiterate the key question for me again.
The key is actually the recognition of an absence. When is that absence what is the timing of that absence being fulfilled? The speaker last week actually said that, gave the situation where Judas had to identify Christ because people didn't recognise him. we're thinking it's even more so. It's actually off the porch where that fulfillment occurs. And it's both the evil side and the good side that has to be fulfilled.
Thank you. I think you're right that there does need to be a radical shift away from the certainties that make us complacent. I think that, and often those things come at a time where we find ourselves stripped of the kind of certainties that we've had in the past. Some of you may know I've recently written a little piece about my own faith journey, and for me that moment, that time was when my parents died. I was still in primary school, and my mother died of cancer, although I hadn't recognised it was cancer. And then within a few months, my father died as well, and we had no family in Australia, my sister and I. And so for me, that was the time where everything that I was certain about was stripped away. And it was also the time when the questions of the meaning of life and the significance of is there a God, those became absolutely crucial for me in a way that they were not crucial for all of my peers. So I was at a certain distance from my peers at that point. And now I would not wish that on people, on children, but that was my experience, and for me, it set me on the trajectory of searching. And so, look, I think in each person's life there are those times where we thought we knew, and then we realise our hands are empty, and we need to rethink. And so I don't think we can prescribe that, and certainly we can't wish it on people, but the Spirit is at work inviting us at that point. And that's what I want to say about that. Thank you.
Here we go.
Just because it sort of follows on a little bit. Christy talked to us about authenticity last week in terms of being congruent to self and being enabled to be the person that God has called you to be. And so my question, which was triggered by going and visiting the art exhibition at Flinders Uni Gallery on Friday, immediately after the talk. It's a collection of current contemporary, the same thing, contemporary artists, First Nations artists, with the theme being what happened to Indigenous women who went as servants and domestic workers into various households, sometimes embraced by family and sometimes just in sheer slavery, really. And I thought that removal and institutional raising that happened to many people is a dislocation to their authenticity. It's a disruption to their authenticity. So how does authenticity happen to that? Or, as you have illustrated, Vicky, a sudden death that was out of the blue, unexpected, that changes the trajectory of somebody's life, as a removal from your family does.
Now, sorry, the question is for...
It doesn't have to be for Vicky, but it sort of followed on from what Vicky said, so...
We'll start with Vicky, perhaps.
Well, only if she wants to say anything more. Somebody else.
I'm not sure that I want to add much more other than to recognise that each person's experience of loss, of trauma, of dislocation, brings with it a potential, whether for evil or for good, that hangs in the balance. And I think I am profoundly grateful to God who was there for me in some mysterious way. I can't put words on it really, but that's not to say that trauma is good, or that, you know, other people's trauma has not done the opposite, you know. And I don't believe that we interpret correctly when we say, you know, all things work together for good for those who trust God. I actually think that that's a misunderstanding of that passage. I actually think that what it's saying is all things, that is to say creation, tapanta, all things, it's creation. Creation works with us for good. That is to say, just as creation groans with us in Romans 8, so all things work together. But it's not to say that all events are good and that we ought to find something good in everything. You know, there is evil and there is trauma.
Any of the other speakers there? No.
Trauma takes me back to the book that made me, the book of Job. It all goes back to when I was a little boy and our house burnt down, and the Lutheran preacher came and said, "No, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord." Amen. And I didn't really appreciate that. But over the years, the more I began to realise that the book of Job was not just about trauma or even about therapy, but it was wisdom therapy, and it was a therapist that guided Job to discover where the truth was, where all things work together. And that was in creation. So he's taken through the whole of creation to discover all of the places where things have been working together to bring peace and help and healing for that man. And at the end he said, "I see it." And you wonder, is he seeing God? No, he's not seeing a person. He's seeing the mystery of how everything had worked together to become one with him.
Now, I think we've got time for two more great questions. So I can see two hands up.
Thank you. The topic of tonight's session is how to face the big questions of 2021. And to me, Vicky was the only one who's mentioned the big issue or question of 2021. And that is the fact that by the time our grandchildren get to our age, the world will be uninhabitable. And I'm just wondering what the search for authenticity has to say about that very real prospect.
Who would like to go first?
What we need is authentic leaders, don't we? We need leaders who are going to lead. And we need leaders who are accountable to us. And so we need a change of government. We need voices to. We do need all peoples of faith to stand together on this, about the sacredness of creation. And I think that is to some extent happening, but you wouldn't necessarily know it because the media don't necessarily carry it because the media is controlled. And so the fact that 67% of Australians do want the government to do this, and yet we can have a government that has no plan for for 2030 is an outrage, and we need to be outraged. So authentic outrage, I think that there's room for that. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is, other than, you know, at this point we do need authenticity. Yeah.
Authentic outrage, yes.
My only comment is the relationship between authenticity and truthfulness, or being true, being real. And in that state, there's a sense of fluidity or adaptability, like you're actually going to respond to that which is real. So I store a lot of hope in authenticity of faith or of spirituality, not, as I said, to escape, but to actually face and move through. So the Christian church often struggles with reality, and often puts out other sort of visions that would help us escape from that which is most real. So authenticity is deeply grounded in what is real, located, grounded, affected. And we're only saying in our small group, when you were meeting, you know, the bushfires seared us, didn't it? I mean, and hopefully woke us to this ever-present danger. For me, authenticity is hopefully taking us to that which is most real and actually addressing it. So I do see a correlation.
And our final question over here, I think. Our group, in its discussion, saw that there was a conflict between ego and authenticity. And so the question I have is, how can ego be overcome in the interests of authenticity?
I would start with what I talked about here, and that's incarnate wisdom. There is within you a spiritual force. That spiritual force should have first say, should be the primary thing for contemplating, for acting, for outrage. Your contemplative, your inner wisdom, your incarnate wisdom, your inner self, which is far more significant and far more authentic than your ego.
The thing that came to mind in your question, or in response to your question, was a book that I read a few years ago by a neuroscientist, which is called My Stroke of Insight. And she is somebody who was a neuroscientist and then experienced herself having a stroke on the left side of her brain, and over the coming hours basically lost all function on the side of her brain that enables all the sort of rational things that we do. What she drew from that experience, and she had to relearn all sorts of, like, basically everything over the coming years. What she experienced as a right brain person was the connectivity that we were talking about, and she saw people as fluid and as more like energy, positive or negative energy, and I suspect that we have the capacity to overcome our individualistic ego if we practice the sorts of meditation and mindfulness that enable that right side of the brain to shape our experience. Unfortunately, the way the world is, it's very hard to actually make time to do that sort of thing, and yet there's a lot of talk about practicing mindfulness and learning to be present to the moment and all of those sorts of things. I think we have the capacity. I don't know whether we have time left to each of us individually to change to the extent that we need to change to avert the coming ecological crisis, or the present ecological crisis. But nevertheless, I think we can see that certain ways of interacting with the world are egoistic, and we can recognise that the common good and the unity vision is the counter to that.
I heard some time ago, and I don't know how true it is, that English is the only language that capitalizes the word I. And then we have adored the self, the I, in the Western world. And as a matter of fact, the search for authenticity has become a self-referential activity. And yet, we have a spirituality. We have a God who tells us self is only with other selves. Has to be with other selves. You find yourself with others, not outside, not away from, not against others. And that is a hard spirituality to live by. Because we're so used to adoring the I.
Well, I'm sure there's some more questions waiting there, but just hang on to them. And after we finish the formal part of our evening, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for you to informally put your questions to the speakers and discuss them amongst yourselves. Just wanted to make sure I was in the picture. Good. Nothing worse than watching a video when you can't see who's actually speaking. So thank you, everyone, and thank you especially, obviously, our panel members tonight, each one of them in their unique, different ways, great models of authentic Christian witness. Let's give them a round of applause. You know, in spite of everything, there has been so much real authenticity on display tonight, both with our speakers and with people struggling with the issue of authenticity on the tables. You will be able to review a recording of tonight's Seminary of the Third Age session by going to the Effective Living Centre website, the usual place you go looking for Sem 3A recordings, and looking under resources/podcasts. And do please, before you go, fill out a series feedback form. I think those forms are on your tables. So, that's your bloomin' well lot for 2021. You've been waiting a long time to say something like that. But do stay tuned. Do stay tuned for information about next year's Seminary of Third Age sessions, which will start up again as usual in March. But I think we've managed to solve all the problems of the world for the moment in tonight's forum. Well, at least most of them. So it's time now for a well-earned supper and refreshments, which we'd love you to join us for. Please, when you're ready, head into the supper area through the double doors over there. And get your food and drinks, and then I think we need you to find a seat and please eat and drink seated. Bring drinks back to the tables. So thank you, everyone. That's our evening.